Hello, and welcome to Intuitive Insights at Play. I have my camera off because I tripped over some rebar in the street and have quite a shiner. I want to be mindful of those who may find seeing it difficult. So today I'm going to tell a story from Cave Woman's time about resolving trauma called Getting Unstuck. I started writing to a cave woman in my notebook a few decades ago on a day when I was so angry I didn't know if I could bear it. I couldn't think of anyone I wanted to talk with, so I thought if I could talk to anyone dead or alive, who would it be? I'd heard about a time before patriarchy when we lived in cooperative communities where wisdom had been passed down for generations. I knew this type of community must have existed in all parts of the world for humanity to survive. A few stories I know still exist in the Celtic tradition. Some still have access to this type of wisdom from other humans, but it wasn't anyone I had any business bothering. So I picked up my notebook and wrote, "Dear Cave Woman," for the first time. At first, it was all curse words, but once in a while, Cave Woman would chime in and say, "Keep going," or a few other words of encouragement. Some of this dialogue ended up in my book, along with stories from Cave Woman's time that illustrated a point she was trying to make or gave me an example. Her stories always begin with "Let me tell you a story," so here goes. Let me tell you a story. I went below ground with the other women to tell our stories on the cave walls. As I made my way from one cave to another, I slid down a narrow, smooth tube. I lost my bearing and slipped into a crevice. My arm jammed and my head lodged in what felt like a mouthful of jagged teeth. After a slight bit of maneuvering, I could tell I was stuck. Panic filled my body and I screamed and fought until I bled. I thought no one could hear me. Dread filled my body and I stopped moving and screaming and I could no longer speak. The freeze response helped numb the pain as I felt my life slip away. I knew what was happening because I'd been taught this can occur when we're caught by a predator. We freeze when we can't run away or fighting against a predator hasn't worked. As animals, we don't choose the freeze response. Our survival system does. I felt energy coursing through my body, but I could no longer speak or move. I could hear voices far away. They spoke for what seemed like a long time. Then I heard very soft singing, songs I knew well. One woman walked towards me so quietly I didn't hear her footsteps. I only heard her voice get slightly louder than the rest of the voices. She would stop moving, then move forward again. She spoke to my statue-like body and asked to be guided. She asked for permission to touch me. I couldn't talk, but I felt the assent. She must have too. She delicately put her hand on my foot and kneaded it with tenderness. She gently patted her hands on my legs, which called me back into my body. She reassured me again and again that we are amazing, life is amazing, and amazing things were still to come. She rested her hand on my low back and sang about resilience and strength. She placed her hands over my heart and merged it with her own. I could feel love. I could feel her heartbeat. I was able to breathe, and tears clouded my vision. My loose arm began to shake, and she reassured me that was the key to getting free. After the shaking subsided, I felt her hands deftly reach between the rock and my body, surround my stuck arm, and slowly pull it free. With a reach that seemed impossible to me, her hands wrapped my head and freed it from the jaw of jagged rocks. After I was free, the women sat in a circle around me, not too close, yet close enough to hand me a flask filled with water. I felt exposed and vulnerable. I couldn't meet their eyes. They asked me if I was ready to move or if I needed to sit for a while. I said I needed to sit. When I nodded my head to proceed, they asked me to lay on the sand floor and assume the same awkward position I had contorted into in the crevice. Then they asked me to practice coming out of the position several times to give my body the reassurance that the difficulty had passed. I did the best I could. Then I kicked and writhed like a snake and roared like a wild cat. I felt such rage. I understood wanting to kill. As I felt the rage, it morphed into a spear of grief that ran through me and ushered out a flood of tears. I rocked back and forth, and the women joined me in my rhythmic movement and raspy vocalizations, each expressing their own grief, fear, anger, or elation. Finally, I smiled, and we laughed together. I could look each woman in the eye. My ordeal was over. I was alive and back with my wise and loving community. I remember the experience vividly, but I've never had to relive it. I've never had a flashback or been traumatized by the memory. I happily returned to the cave many times in my life. Did you know women painted much of the art found in ancient caves? Who else would bring our world to life in the womb of the earth?